Imagine stepping onto a private jet worth millions, a flying palace where luxury meets absolute power. Now imagine watching that power turn cruel when one wrong move leads to a public slap, a shattered career, and a crew stripped of their dignity in minutes. What would you do? Stay silent or fight back against someone who seems untouchable? This is the story of Amelia Rhodes, a flight attendant who found herself caught in the storm of Valeria Kane, the ruthless black CEO who ruled the skies like her personal kingdom. One moment of defiance set off a chain reaction: firings, blacklists, betrayal, and a war that reached far beyond the cabin walls of a jet. But here's the question that lingers when power crushes the powerless. Can dignity still survive? Can courage turn the tide? When the odds are stacked against you, and what happens when the very people meant to be erased become the ones rewriting the rules of the sky? Stay with us as we unravel this breathtaking story of power, injustice, rebellion, and hope. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because what you're about to hear might just change how you see justice in the skies. What makes a person risk everything they have built in a single, reckless moment at 41,000 feet? It is a question that doesn't have a simple answer. For some, it might be pride. For others, years of hidden pain. And for one young flight attendant named Amelia Rhodes, the moment came aboard a private Boeing 787 Dreamliner known as the Monarch. From the outside, the Monarch looked like a sleek, silver bird streaking through the night sky, its wings flexing gracefully against the thin air above the Rockies. To the world, it was a symbol of wealth and power. Inside, however, it was much more. It was a kingdom in the sky, a moving palace where one woman's word was absolute law. That woman was Valeria Kane. At 42, Valeria was one of the most powerful figures in American technology. She had built her empire from nothing. A black woman who rose through the brutal ranks of Silicon Valley and turned her company, Kane Global Dynamics, into a titan of cybersecurity. Her influence reached boardrooms, government offices, even military command centers. She was feared, admired, envied, but above all, respected. On her jet, though, respect wasn't optional, it was demanded. Every crew member knew that serving Valeria Kane meant perfection, not excellence, not high standards, but flawless anticipation. A single mistake could mean the end of a career. And tonight, as the Monarch cut through the clouds, that truth weighed heavily on everyone who worked the flight. For Captain James Porter, a veteran pilot with 25 years in the air, it meant double-checking every detail of the route from New York to Los Angeles, even when the sky was calm. For First Officer Sofia Alvarez, it meant recalculating turbulence forecasts 3 times, determined to keep the ride smooth. For Senior Attendant Leo Grant, it meant memorizing Valeria's preferences down to the smallest gesture, the way she liked her napkins folded diagonally, not square, the exact pressure of carbonation in her sparkling water. And for Amelia Rhodes, the newest addition to this elite crew, it meant fighting a battle inside her own heart before she even stepped on board. At 30, Amelia looked the part of a professional flight attendant. Polished uniform, tidy blonde hair, a smile that seemed effortless. But behind her careful mask, her life was unraveling. Only a week earlier, the man she had supported through years of failed business ventures had walked out, leaving her drowning in debt and loneliness. Her apartment felt empty, her bank account nearly empty too. She had chosen this job to prove she could stand in rarefied air, that she belonged among the world's elite. Instead, she found herself suffocating in silence. as she checked the catering inventory in the Monarch's galley. Amelia's hands trembled slightly. She tried to steady them, breathing deep, telling herself she could get through this flight. Just one more flight. One more chance to show she was worthy of this impossible standard. "Amelia, you with us?" Leo asked gently, noticing her distraction. His voice was kind, the voice of a man who had seen too many new attendants burn out under Valeria's demands. She forced a smile. "I'm fine. Just a long night." Leo nodded, but his eyes lingered. He knew better. He'd been in this profession long enough to recognize when someone was carrying more than a heavy tray. In the forward cabin, Valeria sat alone in a wide leather seat, her tablet glowing with reports and numbers. She looked untouchable. Her black tailored suit, her perfect posture, the piercing calm of her gaze, everything about her screamed control. The cabin around her mirrored her personality: Italian leather and cream, mahogany tables polished to a shine. The air perfumed faintly with bergamot. No detail was accidental. This was her sanctuary, her throne room. For Amelia, stepping into that space always felt like entering a court where one misstep could be fatal. As the Monarch climbed higher into the quiet of the stratosphere, the hum of the engine seemed almost ceremonial. The crew moved with practiced grace, setting trays, adjusting lighting, ensuring that every detail reflected the unyielding standards of their employer. But beneath the calm surface, a storm was building. Amelia could feel it. It lived in the tightening of her chest when she glanced at Valeria. It lived in the memory of her ex's bitter words. "You care more about serving strangers than your own life." And it lived in the silence she felt pressing in on her, a silence that made her question if she was losing herself one small compromise at a time. She smoothed her uniform once more, whispering to herself, "Just get through the night." But she already knew. Somewhere deep inside, she already knew this was not going to be just another flight. The call button chimed softly, a sound no louder than a doorbell, but in the hush of the cabin, it was a royal summons. Amelia's heart jumped. She wasn't ready. Not tonight. Not with her mask already cracking. But she found herself saying quickly, "I'll take it," eager to prove her worth, to silence the voice inside that said she wasn't enough. She stepped toward Valeria Kane's seat, and with that, the stage was set. The night would not end with quiet service and polite farewells. It would end with chaos, humiliation, and a single act that would echo far beyond the Monarch's polished walls. Because sometimes, at 41,000 feet, the smallest spark can ignite a fire no one can control. The Monarch glided smoothly through the night, a floating mansion that seemed to hover above the world rather than slice through it. Inside, the silence was thick, the kind of silence you could only find at cruising altitude, where the rest of the world felt impossibly far away. It was a silence Valeria Kane demanded, cultivated, and expected her crew to protect. The cabin itself was her domain, every corner infused with her signature. Cream leather seats, wide enough to let a person lounge as if on a chaise in Paris. Polished mahogany tables that reflected the warm overhead lights like pools of amber. Crystal vases held fresh orchids that had been replaced just before takeoff. Even the air felt different, humidified to exactly 45%. Scented faintly with bergamot oil, a fragrance chosen by Valeria herself. For Valeria, these weren't luxuries. They were necessities. They were shields against the chaos of the world she had conquered. She had built Kane Global Dynamics with iron will and unrelenting standards. The company secured data for governments, defended banks against cyber attacks, and had its eyes set on winning the nation's most lucrative defense contract. To run such a machine, Valeria believed she too had to be flawless, and on her jet, she expected nothing less. In her private life, she did not allow cracks in the facade. A misplaced lime wedge or the wrong water brand wasn't just an oversight. It was a reminder that perfection could slip. And if perfection could slip here, in her sanctuary, then where else might it slip? Her boardroom, her contracts, her empire. This was the weight every crew member carried. Captain James Porter had flown heads of state and royalty, but serving Valeria Kane felt heavier than both combined. At 53, he had the look of a man carved by wind and sky-graying hair, a steady gaze, and the calm voice of someone who had talked passengers through lightning storms without raising his tone. Yet with Valeria aboard, James triple-checked every course correction, recalculated fuel margins until the numbers blurred. Mistakes simply did not exist in his vocabulary when she was seated behind him. First Officer Sofia Alvarez had joined private aviation after years in commercial cockpits. She was precise, diligent, and sharp, the type who had once been called too intense by airline colleagues. For Valeria, that intensity was barely enough. Sophia reviewed turbulence forecasts so obsessively that James had to nudge her with a wry smile, reminding her that clouds had no vendetta against them. Still, Sophia couldn't relax. If Valeria felt even the faintest bump, it would reflect on the cockpit, back in the galley. Leo Grant carried himself like a man who had made peace with the absurdity of it all. At 47, with 2 decades of serving the ultra-wealthy behind him, Leo was both meticulous and oddly gentle. He remembered the names of ground crew children, brought small gifts for pilots' families, and had a way of grounding Amelia when her nerves spiraled. But even Leo, calm as he was, knew the danger of a slip. He had seen colleagues erased from rosters overnight because of tiny missteps. And then there was Amelia Rhodes. From the outside, she looked polished. Blonde hair pulled neatly into a bun, gray dress uniform pressed crisp, lipstick subtle but practiced. She was good at creating the image of composure, yet underneath, her mind was running itself ragged. The breakup had gutted her, not just emotionally, but financially. Months of supporting her fiancé's failed startup had left her drowning in credit card debt. When he left, the apartment they'd shared felt like a hollow shell. Every corner whispered of failure. Now, at 30, Amelia told herself this job would be her fresh start, proof she could hold her own in a rarefied world where mistakes weren't forgiven. But the more she tried to convince herself, the more brittle the mass felt. She stood in the galley, smoothing napkins into perfect triangles, her mind drifting. She thought of the landlord's email waiting for her after the trip, reminding her that rent was overdue. She thought of the phone call from her mother she hadn't returned, ashamed to admit how bad things had become. She tried to block it all out with the rhythm of her work. Plate here, napkin there, align the silver fork precisely parallel to the knife. But even the symmetry didn't quiet her thoughts. Leo caught her staring blankly at a row of champagne flutes. "Still with me?" he asked gently, echoing his words from earlier. Amelia blinked, startled. She forced a small laugh. "Yes, just focusing." He didn't press, but he didn't look convinced. Leo had seen this before, the way new crew members cracked under the impossible pressure of serving Valeria Kane. He hoped Amelia would be different, but the way her hands trembled as she reached for the crystal glasses told him otherwise. In the forward cabin, Valeria scrolled through her tablet, dissecting quarterly projections as if the world outside the jet didn't exist. She didn't look up when Amelia passed by with a tray. She didn't acknowledge Leo when he adjusted the orchids. For Valeria, the crew were not people in the same sense as her board members or rivals. They were parts of the aircraft, moving mechanisms in service of her order. And for Amelia, that was the wound that cut deepest. She had trained herself to anticipate needs, to create comfort in silence. But here, in this flying palace, she felt invisible. Worse than invisible, she felt like furniture. The realization gnawed at her. Sparking flashes of anger she pushed down again and again. As the Monarch crossed over the dark expanse of the Midwest, Amelia stood in the galley gripping the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "Just hold it together. Just this flight." But the words didn't soothe her anymore. Her mind replayed her ex's last sentence before he slammed the door. "You care more about strangers than me. You'll never be enough for anyone." The cruelty of it tangled with Valeria's indifference, forming a loop she couldn't escape. In that moment, Amelia felt a dangerous mix of resentment and despair. She wanted to prove them wrong. She wanted to show that she was more than enough. But the harder she tried to prove herself, the less control she seemed to have. Up in the cockpit, James and Sophia exchanged brief glances as the intercom pinged with a routine weather update. To them, it was another night, another wealthy passenger. Yet both felt it, the weight pressing from behind the closed door. Neither could name it, but they sensed the tension building in the cabin. And Valeria, she remained composed, her mind locked on figures and strategy. She had no idea that just a few feet away, a storm was brewing in the heart of the woman pouring her water and folding her napkins. A storm that would soon crash into her perfect world with a force no forecast could predict. The Monarch moved steadily westward, a silver bullet slicing through the night. To the outside world, it looked effortless. But inside, small tensions were beginning to take shape. They were invisible at first, like hairline cracks in polished glass. Only those paying close attention could feel the pressure building, the kind of pressure that turned silence heavy and every glance sharper than it should have been. For Valeria Kane, the night was business as usual. She sat in her seat with the posture of someone born to command, though the truth was she had clawed her way to it. Her gaze stayed fixed on her tablet, eyes scanning rows of numbers and columns of text, not once betraying fatigue. To her, this was not just data. It was the pulse of her empire. Every figure mattered, every projection a glimpse into the battles ahead. The world demanded perfection of her, and so she demanded it of everyone else. But for Amelia Rhodes, the world inside the cabin felt suffocating. She smoothed her uniform again, the fabric beneath her palms already perfectly aligned. It wasn't the uniform she was trying to fix, it was herself. The mask she wore for passengers had always felt like armor, but tonight it was more like brittle glass, ready to shatter. Leo Grant noticed it in the smallest details. He saw the way Amelia's smile flickered too quickly, the way she hesitated for half a second before answering questions. He had been in the skies too long not to recognize it. Pressure had a way of leaking through no matter how tightly you tried to contain it. "You okay?" Leo asked as he adjusted the fruit tray in the galley, his tone deliberately casual. Amelia forced a laugh, one that sounded hollow even to her. "Fine. Just keeping up." Leo gave a slow nod. He didn't push, but his eyes lingered. He knew she wasn't fine. Nobody was fine when they started looking at the galley counter as if it might swallow them whole. In the cockpit, James Porter and Sophia Alvarez kept their eyes on the instruments. But even they weren't immune to the mood radiating from the cabin. James had flown enough private clients to know when a flight was running too quiet, when the silence wasn't peace but pressure. Sophia, meticulous as always, noticed Amelia's voice through the intercom earlier, slightly higher, slightly tighter than usual. She said nothing, but she filed it away. Details mattered. Back in the cabin, Valeria pressed the call button. The soft chime rang like a commandment. Amelia's stomach knotted at the sound. She wanted to let Leo take it, to stay hidden in the galley for just another minute. But before she could think twice, she said quickly, "I'll get it." Her heels clicked against the carpet as she stepped toward the main cabin. Valeria didn't look up when Amelia approached, her fingers still moving swiftly across the screen of her tablet. "Yes." "Miss Kane." Amelia's voice was soft, but carried a nervous edge. Valeria set the tablet down, finally lifting her eyes. They were dark and steady, as sharp as polished obsidian. "I'd like a glass of sparkling water. The Andes brand, not the Alpine. 2 ice cubes, uniform in size. A lime wedge. Precisely 3 millimeters. Not 4, not 5. 3. The words themselves weren't unusual. Valeria always gave instructions this specific, this exact. But tonight, the way she said them landed differently. Each syllable struck Amelia like a judgment, a reminder that she was being measured and that the measurement would decide her worth. "Of course," Amelia replied, her voice a little too quick. She turned back toward the galley, her heartbeat thudding against her ribs. In the galley, her hands trembled as she reached for the bottle. She tried to steady them, breathing deeply, but her fingers wouldn't cooperate. She reached for the ice with the tongs, only to find the cubes slightly uneven. She froze, staring at them as if they'd betrayed her. "They're close enough," she muttered under her breath. Leo, arranging utensils beside her, heard the edge in her voice. "Need a hand?" Amelia shook her head too fast. "No, I've got it." She cut the lime, aiming for precision, but the blade slipped slightly. The wedge landed at nearly 5 millimeters. Her chest tightened. Should she cut another? Should she fix it? Or would Valeria notice anyway? No matter how perfect it was. She placed the wedge on the rim of the glass, added the ice, and set the bottle beside it on the silver tray. The tray wobbled slightly as she lifted it. She steadied it with both hands, willing herself not to drop anything. As Amelia carried the tray back to the cabin, she felt the weight of every step. It wasn't the glass she was afraid of spilling, it was herself. Valeria looked up this time as Amelia approached. Her gaze dropped to the glass before her attendant even spoke. She didn't touch it. She simply stared. Amelia stood frozen, tray still in her hands. "Your sparkling water, Miss Kane." Valeria's eyes lingered on the lime, on the uneven ice. The corner of her mouth tightened. "Take it back," she said softly. But the softness was sharper than any shout. Amelia blinked. "I'm sorry." "You heard me? The ice is mismatched. The lime is thick." "I asked for precision. Was that too complex?" The words hit Amelia like a slap before any hand was raised. Her throat tightened. For a second, she couldn't breathe. In her mind, her ex's voice overlapped with Valeria's. "You'll never be enough." She gripped the tray harder, fighting the rising heat in her chest. She wanted to scream, to throw the tray, to tell Valeria exactly what she thought of her impossible standards. But she bit it back, holding on to the thin thread of professionalism. "No, Miss Kane," she said, her voice trembling. "Not too complex." "Then it's simply poor execution," Valeria replied. already lowering her gaze back to her tablet, dismissing her as though the conversation was finished. Amelia's lips parted, words rising before she could stop them. But she cut herself off, swallowing the anger like poison. She turned back toward the galley, her vision blurring. Leo saw her as she returned, her shoulders stiff, her movements jerky. He opened his mouth to say something, but the look in her eyes stopped him. They weren't eyes he recognized. They were dark with something heavier than frustration. She set the tray down too hard, the glass rattling. She pressed her palms to the counter, bowing her head. Her breath came quick and shallow. Inside her, two voices warred. One told her to let it go, to survive the night, to keep her job. The other screamed that she was not furniture, not disposable, not someone to be measured in millimeters. For years, Amelia had chosen silence. Tonight, she wasn't sure she could anymore. And in that fragile silence, with the engines humming steady outside, the storm inside her chest grew louder. The hum of the engines was steady, almost soothing. But inside Amelia Rhodes it sounded like a drumbeat, pounding louder with every second. She stood in the galley, palms pressed flat against the cool counter, trying to breathe. Her chest rose and fell too quickly. She knew Leo was watching her, but she couldn't meet his eyes. If she did, the tears burning behind her lashes might spill, and that would be worse than anything Valeria Kane could say to her. Leo busied himself rearranging a stack of plates, but his voice was low and careful. "Amelia, don't let her get inside your head. She's been doing this to people for years. It's not about you." But Amelia wasn't so sure. Everything felt personal when you were already breaking inside. She lifted the glass again, cut another lime wedge, this time with surgical precision. She checked the ice cubes, replacing one twice until they looked identical. She steadied the tray and told herself, "Just deliver it. Smile. Walk away. Survive." Her steps back to Valeria's seat felt heavier than before. She lowered the tray with trembling hands, careful not to rattle the glass. "Your water, Miss Kane," she said softly. Valeria's eyes flicked up. She studied the glass again, pausing long enough to make Amelia's stomach twist. Finally, she gave a single nod and reached for the tablet beside her once more. Amelia turned, relief and humiliation tangled in her chest. She had passed the test, for now, but the words still rang in her ears. Simply poor execution. As she moved toward the galley, her mind screamed against the silence. Poor execution. Not good enough. Never good enough. The same refrain that had haunted her since her ex's betrayal. Leo caught her as she returned, his expression a mix of worry and warning. He lowered his voice. "She'll push. That's what she does. But you can't push back. Not here. Not with her." Amelia nodded stiffly. But inside, something had begun to shift. She looked at Valeria seated in her throne of leather and mahogany, untouchable, unbothered, dissecting her empire as though the people around her were invisible. Amelia thought of the debt notices, the unanswered calls from her mother, the silence of her apartment at night. She thought of the years she had spent serving, smiling, making herself small so others could feel large, and a question formed in her mind, one she wasn't ready to face. How much longer could she keep swallowing herself just to keep others comfortable? In the cockpit, James Porter adjusted their altitude slightly, responding to a request from air traffic control. Sofia Alvarez glanced at the instruments, her voice calm. "Smooth ride tonight." James gave a quiet chuckle. Almost too smooth. Makes you wonder what's brewing in the back. Sophia arched a brow. You feel it too. 25 years in this job, James said. You learn to read the air inside the cabin as much as outside. Something's off back there. He wasn't wrong. Back in the galley, Amelia leaned against the counter, her breathing finally slowing. She smoothed her hair, adjusted her uniform, forced her face back into composure. But under the surface, the storm raged on. She thought of the years she had spent being careful, always careful, in school, as the quiet one who never spoke up, in relationships, as the supporter, the fixer, the one who gave more than she received, in work, as the servant who smiled even when dismissed. And now, at 30, standing on a multi-million-dollar jet, she realized that being careful hadn't saved her. It hadn't saved her from heartbreak, from debt, from being dismissed by someone like Valeria Kane as though she were less than human. The thought burned like fire in her chest. Leo's voice broke through again, gentle but insistent. Don't take the bait. Just get through this flight. Trust me, it's not worth it. Amelia nodded, but her mind whispered the opposite. Maybe, for once, it was worth it. She glanced at Valeria again. The CEO hadn't moved, hadn't looked her way, hadn't acknowledged her existence beyond a glass of water and a sharp word. Something in Amelia clenched. She wasn't angry only at Valeria. She was angry at herself for letting it happen, for staying silent, for carrying the weight of other people's comfort while her own life fell apart. The plane moved smoothly across the sky, a perfect ride. But inside Amelia, the crack in the glass widened. Valeria pressed the call button again. The chime echoed like a warning bell. Amelia froze. Leo stepped forward instinctively. I'll take it. But Amelia shook her head. No, I've got it. Her voice was sharper than before, edged with something Leo didn't like. He opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. He had learned that sometimes you couldn't stop someone from walking into the storm they carried inside. Amelia straightened her uniform once more, lifted her chin, and walked back into the lion's den. Valeria didn't look up until Amelia stood beside her seat. Her eyes were steady, unreadable. I'd like tea this time. Chamomile? Honey. Exactly 1 teaspoon. Stirred counterclockwise. The specificity should have been absurd. But in Valeria's world, it was normal. It was control. Yes, Miss Kane, Amelia said, her voice low. She turned back to the galley, but her mind was no longer calm. The instructions replayed in her head, each word cutting deeper. Chamomile, honey, counterclockwise, as though she were a machine, not a person. She brewed the tea carefully, her movements mechanical. The honey drizzled into the cup. The spoon circled counterclockwise. She placed the cup on the saucer, set it on the tray, and paused. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished surface of the silver tray. She didn't recognize the woman looking back. The woman looked tired, fragile, hollow. Amelia whispered to her reflection, barely audible. What are you doing? She didn't have an answer. With trembling hands, she carried the tray back to Valeria. The CEO looked up as the tea was placed before her. She lifted the spoon, stirred once, and sipped. Her face remained unreadable for a moment that felt like an eternity. Finally, she set the cup down and spoke a single word. Adequate, adequate. The word hit Amelia harder than poor execution had. Adequate was worse than failure. Adequate meant invisible, replaceable, unremarkable. Her chest tightened. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. She turned quickly, retreating to the galley before the fire in her eyes could be seen. Leo watched her, his heart heavy. He could see it now. Amelia wasn't just shaken. She was breaking. And once something began to break at 41,000 feet, there was no telling how far the pieces might scatter. The Monarch sliced through the darkness, engines whispering a steady hymn of power. The world below was asleep, unaware that high above, a fragile battle was unfolding in the confined luxury of a jet cabin. Amelia Rhodes stood in the galley, her back pressed against the cabinets, her breath uneven. She could still hear the word echoing in her head adequate. It wasn't an insult, but it wasn't praise either. It was dismissal. The kind of word that erased you without even bothering to crush you. Leo Grant tried to catch her eye, but Amelia wouldn't look at him. He saw her jaw tighten, saw her fingers tap restlessly against the counter, saw the storm that had been gathering finally begin to leak out. He'd seen crew members unravel before, but not like this. Not with this intensity. Amelia, Leo said softly, don't let her define you. She doesn't see anyone here as people. To her, we're all parts of the aircraft. That doesn't make her right. Amelia finally looked at him, her eyes bright, glassy. What if she is right? What if I am just adequate? Leo shook his head. You're exhausted. You've been through hell before you even stepped on this plane. But you're not inadequate. Trust me. I've flown with people who didn't care, who coasted. That's not you. Amelia's lips trembled, but she didn't reply. Instead, she pushed off the counter and straightened her uniform again. It was habit by now, fixing fabric when what she really wanted to fix was her life. In the cockpit, James Porter and Sofia Alvarez monitored a new weather update. A thin band of turbulence loomed ahead, nothing dangerous but enough to disturb the perfect stillness of the ride. James radioed back minor adjustment, angling slightly south to avoid the bump. Close one, Sofia remarked, her eyes still sharp on the instruments. Yeah, James replied, but you feel it, don't you? The tension. Sofia glanced sideways. Cabin. He nodded. I can feel it from here, like static in the air. She didn't argue. She felt it too. Back in the main cabin, Valeria Kane set her tablet aside. For the first time that evening, she reclined slightly, closing her eyes as though to rest. But Valeria never really rested. Her mind kept working, cataloging, calculating. She thought of the upcoming negotiations in DAC, of the senators she would have to charm, of the rivals waiting for her to stumble. Power was a lonely seat, and she had no intention of surrendering it. Her hand brushed the cup of tea on the table beside her. She opened her eyes, frowned faintly, and pressed the call button again. The chime rang out. In the galley. Amelia flinched. She wasn't ready. Not again. She wanted to scream, to rip the button out of the ceiling. Leo reached for the galley phone. Let me handle it. But Amelia shook her head sharply. No. She called me. I'll go. Her tone startled him. There was steel in it now, not the fragile compliance he had heard before. She stepped into the cabin once more, heels clicking against the carpet. Valeria didn't open her eyes until Amelia stood at her side. Yes, Miss Kane, Amelia said, her voice steady but taut. Valeria gestured toward the tea. It's lukewarm. I expect it fresh. And next time, do not delay. When I press the button, I shouldn't have to wait. The words landed like stones. Something inside, Amelia snapped. She heard her own voice before she realized she was speaking. With respect. Miss Kane. It was made fresh. I followed your instructions exactly. The silence that followed was heavier than the engines, heavier than the sky outside. Valeria's eyes opened, sharp and dark. She studied Amelia as if seeing her for the first time. "Are you correcting me?" Valeria asked softly, dangerously. Amelia's pulse thundered in her ears. Her body screamed at her to retreat, to apologize, to bow. But another part of her, the part that had been silenced for years, stood taller. "I'm saying," Amelia replied, her voice trembling but firm, "that perfection isn't possible when the standards keep shifting. No matter what I do, it will never be enough for you." Leo, standing in the galley, froze. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. His instincts told him to intervene, to step between them before the words spiraled into something worse. But he stayed still, knowing that if he did, Amelia might never forgive him. Valeria leaned forward, her voice low. "You are here because I allow it. You serve because I permit it, and you speak because I tolerate it. Do not confuse my patience with equality." The words were ice. They sliced through the cabin, and Amelia felt them cut deep. But instead of backing down, she held Valeria's gaze. Her heart pounded, her hands shook, but she didn't look away. For the first time in her career, she refused to be invisible. Valeria's lips curled into a faint smile, one that held no warmth. "Interesting. You think you're brave. You think your voice matters here. But let me remind you, this is my jet, my rules, and when someone forgets that, they don't fly again." Amelia's throat tightened. She could feel the edge of the cliff beneath her feet. One wrong word, and her career, her fragile stability, everything she'd clung to would vanish. But in that moment, fear wasn't the loudest voice in her head. It was anger. It was pride. It was the deep, aching need to be seen as more than adequate. Her lips parted. "Maybe," she whispered. "You're the one who's forgotten something. Power doesn't make you untouchable. It just makes you lonelier." The words hung in the air like static before a lightning strike. Valeria's smile vanished. She rose slowly, her full height imposing. The air between them thickened, the kind of silence that preceded chaos. Leo finally stepped forward, his voice firm. "Amelia, that's enough." But Amelia didn't move. She couldn't. The storm inside her had finally found its voice, and there was no pulling it back. The Monarch flew on, smooth and steady, but inside its gilded cabin, turbulence had arrived, and this kind couldn't be avoided by changing course. The Monarch streaked through the night sky, its polished fuselage reflecting faint starlight. To an observer outside, it was the picture of serenity. But inside the cabin, serenity was gone. Valeria Kane stood at full height now, her presence filling the narrow aisle like a wall of power. Amelia Rhodes remained frozen across from her, her heart racing so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. The air between them pulsed with tension. Leo Grant's instincts screamed at him to step in, to pull Amelia back before she crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. But one glance at Amelia's face told him he was already too late. Her eyes were no longer just frightened. They burned with something he had never seen in her before: defiance. Valeria's voice cut through the silence, low but charged. "Say that again." Amelia's breath trembled. She wanted to retreat, to swallow her words, but they refused to stay buried this time. "I said power doesn't make you untouchable. It makes you lonelier. And maybe you hide behind these impossible standards because you know it." The words came out sharper than she intended. A gasp escaped Leo before he could stop it. Valeria's expression didn't change, but her eyes darkened. "Do you understand what you've just done?" Amelia's throat felt tight, but her voice didn't falter. "Yes." For a heartbeat, silence swallowed the cabin. Even the steady hum of the engines seemed distant, like the world itself was holding its breath. Valeria's hand moved slowly toward the table. She picked up the porcelain cup of tea, still half full. Without breaking eye contact, she tipped it sideways, letting the lukewarm liquid spill across the polished wood. The tea pooled, dripping to the carpet below. "Clean it," Valeria said softly. "Now." Amelia's chest constricted. Every instinct told her to kneel, to obey, to survive this moment. But her body didn't move. Her legs refused. Leo stepped forward quickly, placing himself slightly between them. "I'll take care of it, Miss Kane." Valeria's gaze flicked to him. Icy. "I wasn't speaking to you." "Leo." Her eyes returned to Amelia. "You will clean it, or you will leave this plane midair. Do you understand me?" The words were a threat and a promise, delivered with terrifying calm. Amelia felt her pulse thundering in her ears. Images flashed in her mind. Her mother's face, her empty apartment, the eviction notices, the echo of her ex's words, "You're not enough." She had bowed her entire life, and where had it left her broke? Alone, invisible. Her jaw tightened. She whispered, barely audible, "No." Valeria's head tilted. No, Amelia's voice grew stronger. "I won't kneel. Not to you. Not anymore." The words shattered the cabin's fragile silence. Leo's breath caught. He had prayed Amelia would back down, but now he knew they were past the point of return. Valeria's hand moved faster than anyone expected. A sharp crack split the air as her palm connected with Amelia's cheek. The sound echoed off the cabin walls, louder than the engines, louder than the world itself. Amelia stumbled back, her hand flying to her face. Heat spread across her skin where Valeria had struck her. Leo lunged forward. "Enough!" His voice shook with anger. "Miss Kane, this is assault." Valeria's chest rose and fell, her calm mask cracking. For the first time, she forgot her place, I reminded her. Amelia's vision blurred with tears, but they weren't only from the sting on her face. They were from the weight of years pressing down, colliding with the raw fury boiling up inside her. She straightened slowly, her hand still pressed to her cheek. Her voice came out hoarse but steady. "You don't get to hit me. You don't own me." Valeria's nostrils flared. "I own this jet. I own your paycheck. I own whether you ever fly again. Don't confuse survival with freedom." Amelia's body trembled, but she didn't back down. The slap had hurt. Yes, but it had also ignited something. For the first time, she realized she wasn't afraid of losing this job. She was afraid of losing herself. Leo placed a hand on Amelia's arm, his eyes pleading. "Please, think about this. Don't throw your life away for one moment." But Amelia shook her head. Her life had already been thrown away piece by piece, moment by moment, every time she chose silence. Tonight, she wasn't choosing silence anymore. "I'd rather lose everything," she said, her voice breaking, than spend one more second being invisible. Valeria's lips pressed into a thin line. Her hand twitched as though she might strike again, but she didn't. Instead, she leaned forward, her words sharp as knives. "Then you've chosen destruction. Not just for yourself. For everyone here." Amelia frowned. "What do you mean?" Valeria's eyes flicked toward the galley, toward Leo. "When one fails, all fail. Do you think I will tolerate a crew that can't control itself? I'll replace every last one of you by morning." The blood drained from Leo's face. He glanced at Amelia, fear and anger mixing in his expression. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was theirs. The cabin door to the cockpit clicked open, and James Porter stepped out. His voice was firm, his eyes hard. "Is there a problem here?" For a moment, nobody answered. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Valeria turned toward him, her expression smooth again, as though the storm had never touched her. "Handle your crew," she said coolly, "or I will." James's gaze shifted from Valeria to Amelia, to Leo, to the spilled tea still staining the carpet. He understood immediately. He didn't need details to know the truth. He could feel it in the air. But as captain, he also knew one wrong move could bring consequences far beyond this flight. "Back to your seats," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of command. Amelia's throat tightened. For a second, she thought he was speaking to her, telling her to retreat, to fold. But then she saw his eyes steady, deliberate. He wasn't just speaking to her. He was speaking to Valeria, too. The CEO's jaw clenched, but she didn't argue. She sank back into her seat, her posture regal, her silence louder than any words. Amelia, shaking, turned back toward the galley. Leo guided her gently, his hand steady on her arm. As the galley door swung closed behind them, Amelia leaned against the counter, her breath ragged, her cheek burned, her chest heaved. Leo whispered fiercely, "Do you know what you've done? She's going to fire us. All of us." Amelia's tears finally spilled. I couldn't let her break me again. I had to say something." Leo's voice softened, though frustration still laced it. "You don't understand. It's not just your job. It's mine. It's James's. It's Sophia's. She'll take us all down." Amelia's stomach twisted. The fire inside her dimmed, replaced by something colder guilt. She hadn't just put herself at risk. She had put them all at risk. Her reflection stared back from the polished counter, her cheek red, her eyes swollen. She hardly recognized herself. The Monarch flew steady through the night, but inside, everything had shifted. For Amelia Rhodes, there was no going back. The Monarch sailed onward, its nose pointed across the Atlantic night. The stars outside were countless, sharp and clear. But inside the cabin, the atmosphere was thick, suffocating, like a storm pressing against invisible glass. In the galley, Amelia Rhodes leaned heavily against the counter, one hand pressed against her cheek. Her skin still throbbed where Valeria Kane's hand had landed. But the sting wasn't what hollowed her chest. It was the silence that followed. The silence of knowing Leo was right. She hadn't just risked herself. She'd risked everyone. Leo's voice was hushed, urgent. She meant it. "Amelia, Valeria doesn't make empty threats. If she wants us gone, we're gone." Amelia closed her eyes, tears threatening again. "I know. God, I know. But what was I supposed to do? Let her humiliate me forever? Pretend I'm furniture?" "You're supposed to survive," Leo snapped, then instantly regretted his tone. His shoulders sagged. "Amelia, I get it. More than you know. I've swallowed more than my share on this job. But you can't fight someone like her head on. She'll crush you. She'll crush all of us." His words carved deeper than Valeria's slap had, because beneath his frustration, there was truth. Amelia could feel it. The galley door creaked open, and Captain James Porter stepped inside. His presence filled the small space, his calm radiating like a steady hand on a wheel. He looked at Amelia, then at Leo. His eyes quiet but sharp. "Tell me what happened," James said. Amelia hesitated, her lips parting, but no sound came out. Leo shifted uneasily, glancing at her. "She slapped her," Leo finally said, his voice low. "Right in the cabin." James's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked to Amelia's cheek, red and swollen. A muscle twitched near his temple, but his tone remained level. Did anyone else see? Amelia shook her head. "No, just Leo." "Good," James muttered. "Then it's her word against yours, and we both know whose word carries more weight." The words landed heavy. Amelia's stomach turned. She had already known it, but hearing it from the captain made it undeniable. James sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Listen to me carefully. For the rest of this flight, there will be no more confrontations, no raised voices, no defiance. We keep it professional until we land. Understood?" Amelia wanted to scream, to tell him she couldn't possibly stay silent after what had happened. But one look at his face told her he wasn't asking. He was pleading for his crew, for their livelihoods, for peace in a battle they couldn't win at 41,000 feet. Her throat tightened, but she nodded, understood. Leo exhaled shakily, relief flickering in his eyes. James lingered for a moment, then added, "When we land, we'll talk. But up here, she's still the one with the power. Don't give her another excuse." With that, he turned and slipped back toward the cockpit, leaving Amelia and Leo alone again. The galley felt smaller than ever. Amelia pressed her palms against the counter, her chest heaving. "I feel like I'm suffocating." Leo's hand touched her shoulder, steady, grounding. "You're not alone. I'm here, but you've got to hold it together." She nodded weakly, though inside her resolve churned. She had promised James silence, but silence was what had broken her in the first place. In the main cabin, Valeria Kane sat composed, her posture regal, her tablet balanced on her lap once more. Her hand didn't tremble, her face revealed nothing, but deep in her chest a pulse of anger lingered. The audacity of that girl, to speak back, to challenge her. Valeria had spent her life conquering rooms, silencing voices, bending others to her will. That was how empires were built, through dominance, through unshakable control. But Amelia's defiance gnawed at her, small but sharp, like a splinter she couldn't ignore. For the first time in years, Valeria felt something rare, vulnerability, and she hated it. She tapped her tablet harder than necessary, scrolling through contracts, but her eyes didn't focus on the words. Instead, she replayed Amelia's voice. "Maybe you're the one who's forgotten something. Power doesn't make you untouchable. It just makes you lonelier." Valeria's lips pressed tight. Loneliness. The word had cut too close. She would bury that thought, bury it deep. Hours passed, but the tension didn't ease. Amelia busied herself with small tasks in the galley, reorganizing silverware, polishing glasses that were already spotless. Each movement was mechanical, performed to stave off the collapse she felt inside. Leo tried to keep the atmosphere light, murmuring about flights they'd taken years before, passengers they'd endured, storms they'd ridden out. But Amelia only half heard him. Her mind wandered, looping through shame, anger, fear, and guilt. Every time she touched her cheek, the heat reminded her of the choice she had made, a choice that couldn't be undone. She imagined the aftermath termination notices, blacklisted from charter work, whispers in the industry about the unprofessional attendant who dared speak against Valeria Kane. Her career could end the moment the wheels touched down. And yet, She also felt a flicker of pride. For once in her life, she hadn't bowed. She hadn't been invisible. Even if it cost her everything, she had spoken. The contradiction gnawed at her, keeping her restless. In the cockpit. Sophia glanced over her shoulder at James. Everything okay back there? James didn't look away from the instruments. Define okay. Sophia gave him a look. You heard something? He exhaled slowly. I saw enough. She didn't press further. Instead, she adjusted their course slightly, guiding them toward calmer air. Her voice was quiet, almost reflective. Sometimes turbulence inside is worse than turbulence outside. James's lips pressed thin. He couldn't disagree. By the time the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, the Monarch was quiet again. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that left every breath sounding loud, every movement amplified. Amelia sat on the jump seat in the galley, staring at nothing. Her mind replayed the slap again and again, each echo louder than the last. Leo crouched in front of her, his eyes kind, but weary. Listen to me. Whatever happens when we land, you can't blame yourself. Valeria's the one who crossed the line, not you. Amelia's voice cracked. But she'll punish all of us. I dragged you into this. Leo shook his head firmly. No, don't carry that weight. We're a crew. We share it. Her eyes burned with tears, but his words anchored her. For the first time that night, she felt a flicker of solidarity. She wasn't completely alone. Still, as the engines droned and the horizon brightened, Amelia knew one truth the silence James had asked for wouldn't last. Not forever. Something inside her had already broken free, and once it had a voice, it would never be silent again. The Monarch glided through dawn, its wings carving pale streaks across the horizon. From outside, it looked like any other corporate jet-faring power across the sky. Inside, though, the atmosphere was brittle, as if every breath threatened to shatter it. Valeria Kane had not spoken since the slap. She hadn't needed to. Her silence was louder than any outburst. She sat with perfect posture, reviewing contracts on her tablet, every swipe sharp, deliberate. But her mind wasn't on the documents. It was circling Amelia's words, circling the defiance that had unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Loneliness. The word had pierced. She despised that, and she despised the woman who had dared to say it aloud. By the time the Monarch crossed into American airspace, Valeria had already made her decision. Discipline wasn't just necessary. It was inevitable. She pressed the call button. The chime echoed like a gunshot through the cabin. In the galley. Amelia froze. The sound burrowed into her chest, stirring panic. Leo touched her arm gently. I'll go. But Amelia shook her head. No. If I hide, it's worse. Her voice was fragile, but determined. She pushed herself up, smoothing her uniform. Her legs trembled as she walked down the aisle, but she kept her chin lifted. Yes, Miss Kane, she said softly when she reached the seat. Valeria's eyes flicked up, cold and sharp. Fetch your captain. Now. Amelia's stomach tightened. Yes, ma'am. She turned toward the cockpit, her heart pounding. Moments later, James Porter emerged, adjusting his tie, his expression neutral but wary. You asked for me. James said. Valeria set her tablet aside. Yes, it's time we address the incompetence on this aircraft. James's shoulders squared, but his voice remained calm. Miss Kane, the crew has performed according to standard protocol. Protocol. Valeria's laugh was humorless. One of your attendants disrespected me to my face. She raised her voice, challenged my authority. and then failed to complete a simple task. And you call that protocol? James's jaw tightened. He didn't glance at Amelia, though he felt her eyes on him, pleading silently. With all respect, Miss Kane, I was under the impression this was a passenger service, not a dictatorship. Valeria's gaze hardened. You forget yourself. Captain, this is my jet. You and your crew are in my employment. If you cannot ensure discipline, I will find someone who can. Her words struck like knives. The quiet hum of the engines filled the silence that followed. Amelia's throat constricted. She could see the calculation in James's eyes, the impossible balance between protecting his crew and protecting their futures. Finally, James spoke. His voice was even, but his tone carried warning. If you wish to replace us, that's your prerogative when we land. But until then, I am responsible for this aircraft, and as long as we are in the air, I will not allow mistreatment of my crew. Valeria's lips pressed into a thin line. You're protecting her. All of you. Do you think solidarity will save you? It won't. It will doom you. She leaned back in her seat, her voice sharp as glass. Consider this your notice when we touch down. You're finished. Every last one of you. Amelia's breath caught. Leo, standing in the galley, closed his eyes in despair. Sophia's voice crackled over the intercom from the cockpit captain. We'll be descending shortly. James gave a curt nod and returned to the cockpit, his shoulders heavy. Amelia lingered for a moment, frozen. Valeria's gaze bored into her, a silent reminder of her place. Finally, Amelia forced herself back to the galley, where Leo immediately grasped her arm. She's going to do it, Leo whispered. She's really going to destroy us. Amelia's eyes brimmed with tears. I didn't mean for this. It doesn't matter what you meant, Leo cut in, though his tone was more desperate than cruel. She's got the power, and we're trapped at 41,000 feet with her until we land. The realization sank into Amelia's bones. The slap had been personal, but this was systemic. Valeria wasn't punishing one of them. She was punishing all of them. Minutes later, as the Monarch descended through layers of pale morning clouds, Amelia felt her heart climb into her throat. Each mile closer to the ground was 1 mile closer to the execution of Valeria's threat. She imagined the terminal waiting below, Valeria striding off the jet with her entourage of lawyers and assistants, blacklists spreading across the industry like wildfire. She saw herself packing her life into boxes, drifting further into obscurity. But alongside the fear came something else: resolve. Maybe Valeria could take her job. Maybe she could take her reputation. But she couldn't take back Amelia's voice that had already been spoken. As the landing gear thumped down, Amelia braced herself, tears threatening but held back. She knew the moment those wheels touched the runway, everything would change. The Monarch landed smoothly, rolling down the strip with quiet grace. But inside, no one breathed easy. Valeria gathered her belongings with precision, her movements sharp, controlled. Amelia and Leo moved through the cabin, performing final duties with mechanical motions, their chests heavy with dread. James and Sophia guided the plane to a stop, their faces masks of professionalism hiding the storm beneath. When the door finally opened, cool morning air rushed in. But it wasn't freedom. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. Valeria Kane descended the stairs first, her heels clicking against the metal, her silhouette framed by the rising sun. Behind her, the crew exchanged a single glance, part fear, part solidarity, part unspoken vow. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And Amelia Rhodes, standing at the doorway with her heart hammering, knew one thing with clarity silence had ended. The storm was only beginning. The Monarch taxied to its private hangar, sunlight glinting across its sleek silver body. To an observer, the scene was ordinary, a corporate jet completing its journey, passengers about to disembark. But for the crew inside, every second felt like a countdown. Valeria Kane was first to stand. Her heels clicked against the cabin floor as she moved with calm precision. Her tablet was tucked neatly into her leather case, her jacket draped perfectly over her shoulders. She looked like victory embodied. "Gather your crew," she said to James, her tone clipped, final. "I will address this before I leave." James hesitated, his jaw flexing, but he gave a curt nod and gestured for Leo and Amelia to come forward. Sophia emerged from the cockpit as well, wiping her palms against her uniform. The four of them stood in the aisle, side by side. For once, they felt less like individuals and more like a line of defense. Valeria regarded them as though they were chess pieces she had already decided to sweep from the board. "You failed me," she began, her voice even. "You failed in service, in respect, in understanding the balance of power aboard this aircraft. One of you, her eyes locked on Amelia, forgot her place, and the rest of you chose to protect her instead of correcting her." Amelia's throat tightened, but she forced herself to keep her gaze steady. The mark on her cheek still burned, though it was fading into a dull ache. Valeria continued, "As of this moment, your employment with Monarch Executive Aviation is terminated. Security will escort you from this facility. You will receive no references, no protections, no leniency. You are finished." The words landed like hammer blows. Leo flinched, his face pale. Sophia's hands clenched into fists at her sides. James remained still, but his eyes flashed with quiet fury. Amelia's chest rose and fell rapidly. She had known this was coming, but hearing it out loud made her legs feel weak. Valeria slung her bag over her shoulder and started toward the exit. But before she reached the door, James spoke. "Miss Kane." She stopped, turning slightly. His voice was calm, steady. "You're making a mistake." Valeria's brows arched. "Am I?" "Yes," James said firmly. "Because leadership isn't about domination. It's about respect. And you've lost it not just from us, but from anyone who's ever worked under you. People don't follow fear forever. Eventually, fear collapses. For the first time." Valeria's composure cracked, if only slightly. "You think you can lecture me on leadership? Look at yourself. You're already finished." James didn't move. "Maybe. But even if we lose our jobs, even if you bury us in blacklists and contracts, we'll walk away with our dignity intact. Can you say the same?" Silence stretched. The engines had gone quiet, but the cabin buzzed with something heavier than sound. Valeria's jaw tightened. Without another word, she turned and descended the stairs, her heels striking like gavel blows. For a moment, no one moved. The crew stood frozen, the echo of her presence still pressing against them. Then Leo let out a shaky laugh, half hysteria, half despair. "Well, that's it. We're done," Sophia muttered under her breath. "I'd rather be done than keep flying for her." Amelia sank into a nearby seat, her hands trembling. Guilt coiled in her stomach like a knot. "I ruined everything. I dragged all of you down with me." "No," James said sharply. "She did this, not you." But Amelia shook her head, her eyes glassy. "If I had just stayed quiet, then she would have kept winning." Sophia interrupted, her voice firm. She'd keep walking all over people until none of us remembered who we are. You stood up to her. You reminded her she's not untouchable. That matters." Amelia blinked at her, surprised. Sophia wasn't one for emotional speeches, but her words carried weight. Leo sat heavily on the armrest beside Amelia, running a hand down his face. "It matters, sure, but it doesn't pay rent. And when word gets out, who's going to hire us? Nobody wants crew with baggage." Silence followed. The truth in Leo's words was undeniable. Amelia's chest tightened. She thought of her bills, her empty apartment, her mother's disappointed sighs. Fear crawled up her throat like smoke, but beneath it, another feeling simmered, defiance. She spoke softly, but with conviction. "Then we make our own path. If no one will hire us, we'll build something they can't ignore." Leo looked at her skeptically. "You mean, what, start our own airline?" Amelia shrugged, a faint, almost reckless smile tugging at her lips. "Why not? She doesn't own the sky. She doesn't own dignity. And she sure as hell doesn't own me." The others stared at her, stunned. James' expression softened. "You might be reckless, but maybe you're right." For the first time since the slap, something sparked in Amelia's chest. Hope. Outside, Valeria's black sedan pulled away from the tarmac, her silhouette visible for only a moment before it disappeared behind tinted glass. She believed she had won. But inside the Monarch, the crew sat together, bruised but unbroken. And in the quiet that followed, a seed was planted, fragile, uncertain, but alive. It was the seed of rebellion. The Monarch sat silent in its hangar, gleaming under the morning sun. The engines were still warm, but the people inside felt colder than they ever had. The crew remained in the cabin long after Valeria's black car had disappeared beyond the gates, each of them unwilling to step into the new reality that awaited them outside. Leo paced back and forth, running a hand through his hair, his voice edged with panic. "She's going to bury us. You know that." "Right. We're done in this industry. Every operator, every charter company, they'll get a call from her office. We won't even get interviews. Not even for cargo runs." Amelia sat on the jump seat, staring down at her trembling hands. She wanted to argue with him, to say it wasn't true. But the truth was too sharp, too undeniable. Valeria Kane didn't bluff. She dismantled. Sophia leaned against the cabin wall, her arms crossed, her gaze hard. "So what? Let her blacklist us? I'd rather walk away than crawl back to her." "That's easy for you to say," Leo shot back. "You don't have kids, or a mortgage, or stop." James interrupted, his voice steady but firm. The captain sat upright in one of the passenger seats, his posture immaculate, even in defeat. His eyes moved from Leo to Sophia to Amelia, settling finally on the woman whose red cheek still told the story of the night. "We all know the reality. Valeria wants us finished. But Amelia is right. She doesn't own the sky." Amelia blinked, startled. You actually believe that James gave the faintest of nods. You stood up to her. Amelia, you said what none of us had the courage to. And yes, it may cost us our jobs, maybe even our careers. But in that moment, you reminded her she could bleed. His words settled into the air like sparks landing on dry kindling. Leo scoffed, though his voice wavered. "What good is dignity when you can't pay rent?" Amelia looked at him, her eyes steady for the first time that day. "Dignity is all we have left. If she takes everything else, do you really want to let her take that too?" Leo faltered, his mouth opening. then closing. He had no answer. Sophia pushed away from the wall, her gaze sharp. "So what are you suggesting? That we start something ourselves?" Amelia hesitated. The idea had begun as a flicker, reckless and wild. But now, as she looked at the faces of the people who had stood beside her in the storm, it began to take shape. Why not Valeria built her empire by making people believe she was untouchable? But she's not. She's just loud enough, rich enough, ruthless enough to convince people she is. What if we created something different? A company that treats people like humans instead of pawns. The silence that followed was heavy, charged. Leo shook his head. Do you have any idea what that would take money? Permits? Aircraft? Insurance? We have experience. Sophia cut in. We know the business from the inside out. Maybe not the money, but we have the knowledge. James's lips curved slightly, the ghost of a smile. Knowledge is more valuable than money. If we had the right allies, the right investors. Leo stared at them like they were mad. You're serious? You actually think we can take on Valeria Kane? Amelia straightened, her eyes burning with a quiet intensity. Not take her on, outlast her, outgrow her. She thinks fear is power. We'll prove respect is stronger. Her voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. The conviction behind it filled the cabin. Leo rubbed his face, muttering under his breath. This is insane. But he didn't leave. He didn't walk away, and that said more than his words ever could. James stood, smoothing his uniform one last time. For now, we need to leave this hangar. Security will be here any minute. But if you're serious about this, Amelia, then we start tonight. Quietly, carefully, we plan. Sophia nodded once, sharp and decisive. I'm in. Amelia looked at Leo, waiting. His shoulders slumped, his eyes clouded with fear. But after a long pause, he let out a sigh. Damn it. Fine. I'm in too. But if this ruins me, I'll haunt you all. A small laugh escaped Amelia's lips, the first in what felt like forever. It was brittle, but it was real. The crew gathered their belongings in silence. As they stepped off the Monarch for the last time, the morning air struck their faces, cool and sharp. They walked together across the tarmac, their shadows stretching long in the rising sun. From the observation deck above, Valeria Kane's assistant watched them with a cold, practiced eye. She raised her phone, tapping a quick message. They left together. No fear, be careful. Miles away. In the back seat of her black sedan. Valeria read the message and smiled thinly. She had underestimated them once. She would not do it again. As the crew exited the hangar, Amelia glanced back one final time at the Monarch, its polished metal gleaming like a mirror. She saw herself reflected there, not as the broken attendant she had been, but as someone standing at the edge of something uncharted. Her heart pounded with fear, but also with something new. Possibility. James slowed his stride to fall in beside her. If we do this, Amelia, there's no turning back. I know, she whispered. Are you ready for that? Amelia's lips parted. For a moment, doubt clawed at her throat. But then she remembered Valeria's hand across her face, remembered the fire it lit in her chest, remembered Leo's despair and Sophia's anger and James's quiet defiance. Yes, she said firmly. I'm ready. The four of them stepped out of the hangar together, jobless but not defeated, their silhouettes swallowed by the brightness of the morning. Behind them, unseen, the storm of Valeria Kane's wrath gathered. But ahead of them stretched the open sky. And for the first time since the slap, Amelia Rhodes believed the sky could still belong to her. That evening, a rainstorm swept across the city, streaking neon lights into blurred rivers on the windows of a quiet cafe tucked between office towers. It was the kind of place where meetings happened in whispers, where secrets could hide in the hiss of espresso machines and the low hum of jazz. Amelia Rhodes sat at a corner table, her hair pulled back, a notebook open in front of her. She'd been there for nearly an hour, sketching ideas onto paper, half-formed thoughts about charter models, staffing, even names for a company that didn't yet exist. Each word steadied her nerves, though her hand shook each time she wrote. When James, Sophia, and Leo arrived together, the table seemed to shrink under the weight of their presence. They looked less like a crew and more like a group of survivors clinging to each other after a shipwreck. Leo dropped heavily into a chair. "All right, Amelia, you said you had ideas. Let's hear them. Please tell me they're better than let's all move to Alaska and disappear." Amelia forced a smile. "Better, I think." She slid the notebook toward them. "We know this industry. We know what passengers complain about, what they crave, what makes them loyal. Valeria built her empire on intimidation and exclusivity. But what if we flipped that? What if we built something on respect and trust?" Sophia leaned forward, scanning the notes. "So you're serious, not just talk." "I'm serious," Amelia said firmly. "We start small. One leased jet, maybe two. A crew that passengers actually want to fly with. Treat them like people, not transactions. It's slower, sure, but word spreads fast, especially when you treat people better than the competition." Leo let out a long breath. "You make it sound simple, but planes cost millions. Insurance costs millions. Investors want guarantees. We don't have that." James spoke for the first time, his deep voice cutting through the noise. "What we do have is credibility. Between the four of us, we've logged thousands of hours. We've flown senators, billionaires, athletes. Our reputations are worth something." He paused. "If we find the right partner, someone who hates Valeria as much as we do, we might just stand a chance." The thought hung heavy in the air. Sophia tapped her fingers against the notebook. "Finding that partner won't be easy. Valeria's shadow is long. Nobody wants to cross her." "Somebody will," Amelia said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Someone always does, because tyrants always make enemies." Leo shook his head, muttering, "I can't believe I'm even considering this." But he didn't leave. None of them did. Hours later, when the rain eased and the cafe lights dimmed for closing, the four of them stepped back out into the wet streets with a fragile sense of direction. They didn't have money. They didn't have planes. But they had a plan. And for now, that was enough. What they didn't know was that Valeria Kane already knew of their meeting. Her assistant, Carla, had followed from a distance, snapping photos through rain-smeared glass, sending them directly to Valeria's phone. At that very moment, Valeria was in her penthouse office, overlooking the same city, a glass of red wine in her hand. The photos lit up her screen. Amelia, leaning forward, eyes bright with defiance. James, calm and commanding. Sophia, sharp and attentive. Leo, hesitant but present. Valeria smiled thinly. She admired their audacity, even as she prepared to crush it. "They think they can play entrepreneur," she murmured. "Then let them learn how unforgiving the market is." She pressed a button on her desk phone. "Get Julian Croft on the line." Julian Croft, her legal strategist, thrived on destruction. Within hours, he had drafted letters blacklists disguised as industry advisories, whispers of unreliable crew seeded into inboxes across the private aviation world. By the next morning, James received 3 emails rescinding job offers he hadn't even applied for. Sophia's professional profiles were suddenly suspended. Leo's landlord called, saying his lease was under review. And Amelia's phone buzzed nonstop with anonymous messages. "You'll regret this. You should have stayed quiet." The campaign was invisible, but its effects were immediate. At the cafe the following night, Leo slammed his phone on the table. "She's already coming for us. I knew this was insane. She's not just powerful. She's everywhere." Sophia scrolled through her own messages, her jaw tight. This is how she works. Cut off your oxygen before you can breathe. Amelia's chest ached, but her voice was steady. Then we adapt. If she shuts the doors, we find windows. If she poisons the market, we go outside it. Outside, Leo asked bitterly. "And where's that?" "Amelia Mars." "No," she said firmly. "The people she ignores. The clients who can't afford her arrogance. The ones tired of paying for her ego." James nodded slowly. Underserved clients, smaller markets, high demand, low supply. It's riskier, but it's possible. The table went quiet again. This time, though, it wasn't despair. It was calculation. Amelia looked around at her crew, at the people who had lost everything because of her, but who still showed up night after night. "We can't match her wealth," she said softly, "but we can outlast her greed. She doesn't understand loyalty. She doesn't understand kindness. That's our weapon." And for the first time, Leo didn't argue. Outside, the city pulsed with lights, oblivious to the storm brewing in its skies. Inside the cafe, 4 people sat together with nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. Valeria Kane had fired them. She had blacklisted them. She had tried to erase them. But instead, she had created her greatest threat. The week that followed felt like a siege. Every day brought new obstacles, landlords questioning leases, banks suddenly calling in debts, messages filled with venom and threats. Valeria Kane's shadow stretched into every corner of their lives. But in the middle of that storm, Amelia Rhodes refused to break. She rented a small office above a shuttered bookstore, its paint peeling and lights buzzing faintly. It wasn't glamorous, but it was theirs. On the door, she taped a single sheet of paper with 4 words scribbled in blue ink: "The sky belongs to everyone." It became their motto. James filled the whiteboard with charts of underserved regions, smaller airports that Monarch refused to bother with. Sophia handled logistics, tracking down leasing options and maintenance crews who had quietly soured on Valeria's empire. Leo, still cynical but increasingly restless, began calling contacts who owed him favors, testing the waters. And Amelia, she spent hours drafting proposals, letters, and vision statements, her words stitched with hope and defiance. Every night they left exhausted, but every night they returned. And then, one morning, their opportunity appeared. James received a call from an old senator's aide, someone who had flown with him years before. A delegation needed immediate transport to a conference 2 states away. Their usual operator was booked solid, and Monarch had turned them away with a sneer. "If you can make it happen," the aide said, "we'll pay fair. No questions asked." James hung up, his pulse quickening. They didn't have a plane. Not yet, but Sophia's research came rushing back. There was a Citation jet available for short-term lease at a small airfield outside the city. It wasn't luxury, it wasn't fast, but it was airworthy. They made the call. 2 days later, Amelia stood on the tarmac of that modest airfield, her uniform pressed, her hair tied neatly back. The Citation gleamed faintly in the morning sun, smaller than the Monarch, but radiant in its own right. Behind her, James inspected the flight plan while Sophia ran her hands across the fuselage with professional care. Leo checked the cabin one last time, muttering complaints but ensuring every detail was right. The delegation arrived. Nervous smiles turned to genuine warmth as Amelia welcomed them aboard. There was no intimidation, no disdain, only hospitality that felt human. By the time the wheels lifted from the runway, the passengers were already praising the crew, promising to recommend them. It was a small victory, but for the crew, it was monumental. Word spread faster than they expected. A senator's team mentioned them to a business partner, who mentioned them to an athlete's manager. Within a week, they had 3 more flights booked. Small, humble, but real. And then Valeria noticed. She summoned Julian Croft, her sharp-eyed strategist, into her glass-walled office. "They're ants," she said coldly. "But even ants can swarm if you let them. Shut them down." Julian leaned forward, his smirk razor-thin. "I'll make sure the authorities hear whispers of safety violations. Clients won't risk it." But Julian underestimated them, because James had kept meticulous records of every inspection. Sophia had contacts in maintenance who vouched for their work, and Amelia had something Valeria never possessed: passengers who actually believed in her. When the accusations surfaced, their clients pushed back, defending them publicly. That was when the story broke. A journalist, tipped off by the sudden smear campaign, dug deeper. What she uncovered was explosive leaked recordings from the Monarch's cockpit, detailing the night of the slap, the firing of the crew, and Valeria's relentless campaign of intimidation. The article spread like wildfire. Headlines blared. CEO Valeria Kane, accused of retaliation. Crew fired over incident on jet. News outlets replayed the slap in slow motion, dissecting every angle, every word. For the first time, Valeria wasn't the untouchable titan of the skies. She was a villain exposed. Amelia sat in their cramped office, her phone buzzing nonstop with messages: journalists, clients, strangers offering support. She felt overwhelmed, almost dizzy. Leo dropped into a chair, stunned. "We're everywhere. We're actually everywhere." Sophia crossed her arms, though her lips curved in a rare smile. "She tried to bury us. Instead, she planted us." James simply nodded, his eyes calm. "This is only the beginning." That evening, Amelia walked alone onto the rooftop above their office. The city stretched out before her, lights glittering like 1,000 runways. For a long time, she stood in silence, the cool air brushing her face. She thought about everything they had lost: their jobs, their reputations, their safety nets. She thought about the slap, about Valeria's smirk, about the fear that had once kept her silent. And then she thought about the passengers smiling as they disembarked, about Sophia's determination, James's steadiness, Leo's reluctant loyalty. She thought about their motto taped to the door downstairs: "The sky belongs to everyone." For the first time since it all began, Amelia allowed herself to believe it wasn't just a motto, it was a truth worth fighting for. Her phone buzzed again. It was James. Just 2 words. "New client." She smiled, her chest tight with both exhaustion and hope. The fight wasn't over. Valeria Kane still had wealth, power, and armies of lawyers. But Amelia had something stronger. She had a crew. She had belief. And as the city lights shimmered like stars, she realized something simple, something she should have known all along. The sky didn't belong to Valeria Kane. The sky belonged to everyone. What began with a single slap on a private jet became so much more than a story about humiliation and revenge. It became a mirror of the world we live in, a world where wealth and power too often overshadow respect and fairness. Amelia Rhodes and her crew were meant to be broken, discarded, and forgotten. Instead, they chose to rise, to fight back, and to remind us all of a truth that can't be silenced. The sky belongs to everyone. Valeria Kane's empire thrived on fear, arrogance, and discrimination. She thought control was absolute, that money could erase any consequence. But in the end, it was her cruelty that exposed her, and it was compassion, loyalty, and courage, the very qualities she dismissed that gave the crew strength to build something greater than she ever imagined. Their journey is not just about aviation. It's about every workplace, every voice stifled by power, every person told they don't belong. It's a call to stand up, to demand dignity, and to never let injustice define who we are. If this story moved you, share it. If it made you think, like it. And if you want to be here for the stories yet to come, subscribe. Together, we'll keep these voices alive and remind the world that respect has no price tag.